I'm
Good.
excited to talk about Last Voyage of the Demeter because I finally got around to reading Dracula a couple years ago, and the
Ah,
sequence on the boat was my favorite part. So it
yes.
was great to see that that was getting its own movie. Um, for you, as the production designer, how do you first get into that world that you're building? Do you pick up your copy of Dracula? Are you like somebody who sketches out immediately your thoughts? Do you start Googling 100-year-old boats? What's your process?
Well, it's funny because I sort of thought to myself, well, shall I reread it? Because I remember reading it as a child, and because I love all those sort of scary stories, and and because it was came from Britain, it was something that was always in your DNA. You're always aware of the book. But I thought, okay, I'll read the script first, and then just use the book for anything that maybe wasn't in the script detail wise that I should know. Because the script doesn't always cover all the last details, how big the boat needs to be or how wide it needs to be, how many masts it's got. But obviously the book does. So always go back to the source material and find out as much as you can, and then learn about the history. Why the boat came even into existence? Bram Stoker being a theatrical agent, happening to be in Whitby at the time, sees a shipwreck, and you can take information from all of that stuff, and from the period, of course. So really, yeah, it starts with the script, but then you soon have to sort of expand the world, in design terms, and try and find out what you can. And then you got to remember that you're not making a documentary. You're making something that needs to touch all ages and evoke all sorts of feelings in people. So then you've got to really take it to the next level and make sure that it's a beautiful looking, design, and of course then a practical design for the actors and the crew and everybody else to work on and be safe on, and all those lovely things.
Absolutely. And I know you have like a huge career with a bunch of great projects. I'm a big Doctor Who fan. I know you worked on Doctor Who.
Ah,
Lovely.
yeah,
And also the escape room movies. That's huge for
yeah,
production design because the plot is basically the production. But
yes,
Demeter is really unique because most of the film does take place like entirely on the ship itself. So it's a very contained set. There's different environments within the boat, but you are very strictly designing with that restraint of it needs to be part of a boat. So tell me about how you go about designing something like that, where it's a very specific situation you need to find yourself in.
well, it's interesting because all of those projects you mentioned all play into it. I mean, the whole Doctor Who thing with the various periods every week and different worlds and planets, and then the escape rooms with the claustrophobia, and you learn what the audience, I think, appreciates, and those tight spaces and how to make them work. And whether you're designing a spaceship or a schooner, 18th century schooner, it's the same sort of ideas that the tricks that you use of the trade to make sure that they're scary. But the ship had to be. I mean, first of all, we built all the interiors of the ship in Berlin, in Babelsberg Studios, which was a challenge in itself because you're not at sea, you're not on the open water, you're in a studio environment, yet you're supposed to be on a boat. So all the sets had to be built on rockers so that the lights were static outside, whether it was moonlight or sunlight, but the sets would move to give the actors that feel of the buoyancy and the movement, and it really helps with the performance. I think I mean, I think it's also quite technically challenging for them because if you can't see a horizon line, you start to become seasick very very easily. Even though you're in a studio in the middle of Berlin. But then the challenge is to link those sets. We shot in Malta for the exterior of the ship in the great tank at the Malta Film Studios, and to make that seamless transaction from the below decks element to the above decks element was a real challenge. In terms of lighting, in terms of practical space, being able to go up and down stairwells, looking down into the ship, looking out of the ship, that was a real challenge. But the body of the ship itself and how it works and how it sits in the water, they're technically challenging in themselves, and how you move the ship. We had air tanks that were filled with water and emptied with water at speed so that we could make the ship even move in the tank, and again give the cast that feeling of moving at sea. But and then the continuity of scenic art, because the timbers and the paint finishes below, even though they're not as exposed to the weather as they would be above deck, you're still working with the same timber and the same products, and it has to feel like one world. And I was keen for the boat to have a certain age to it. You know, it's an old sort of lumber ship, if you like. It's a ship that's used to carrying cargo, and and even though this cargo comes as a bit of a surprise, no spoilers intended, it's still a beaten ship. Almost like the ship in Alien. It's a merchant ship, and I think getting that across and retaining that for the audience is important from the outset.
You have so many challenges with setting that up as a boat too, because you're talking about like the movement, and then so much of the movie is taking place at night, so things are going to be dark, like it's raining, there's all this water. What do you have to think about when you're designing sets and figuring out how all that's going to work, both like visually on camera and practically for the actors?
Well, I mean, the first thing you've got to think about when you're filming on a ship in the middle of a tank is fire exits, is getting people on and off the ship. Safety entrances for the crew. Can you imagine getting the camera cranes on there, the crew on there? If you're on a ship and you've got an actor at one end, or two actors at one end, and you've got 60 crew at the other end, you've got to make sure that you can balance that ship. And we do that by having sort of huge air tanks in the bottom of the ship that we can fill with air, that we can level out the ship depending on how much weight load is about. And then you've got the sails. When you put those sails up, the ship thinks it's a ship. And if the wind comes along, anything more than 10, 15 knots, and that ship's, even though it's over 100 tons in weight, starts to move, and that can be frightening because you don't really want it to move anywhere. So all of those safety concerns, but there's some great, obviously, people that deal with all that, all part of the team that you put together to make sure that all that works. And it's the same team that, create all the ropes and the pulleys and all of the period detail in terms of what a ship of that age needs to look like, and would have looked like and needed to look like to operate, So those are the technical challenges. And then, of course, the moon, when a ship travels through the ocean, the moon and the sun move around, but we're static in a tank. So you have to be able to move the ship so that the lighting that you're lighting it with, that you can show the audience that where the moon is, where the sun is. And all sorts of technical challenges that you work with the DOP and the riggers and all those great people to make sure that it all works. And rain and waves. You read in the script that the ship's in a storm, and of course you're in a tank in Malta, so you've got to make waves. You've got to make huge waves to come crashing over the decks. And but I think when you watch the movie, when the audience watches the movie, I challenge them to see what's real and what's not. Because it really does work well from the reality into the CG world, where the CG world takes over.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Okay, final question for you. When you were building out this world, I know there are all these small details, like I already didn't even think about the fact that you've got to have tanks to lift the boat up and all that kind of stuff. Are there any other aspects of the design that you think we won't spot on camera, but that you felt were important to include to sort of get that atmosphere and get that look that you wanted?
Well, I think so much, really, and I'm going to have to watch it again because I watched it last night in Malta with the team here in the cinema, and it's such a roller coaster ride. Even though I designed it, I missed a lot of the details. But what I do love is that the transition from the captain's cabin and the quarters at the rear of the ship, and then the detail that we put into there, the carved columns, the detail in his cabinets and his world, and then as you come through and down past the cargo hold, you come into the crew's quarters, and the world gets worse and shabbier and low level, and even more claustrophobic as you go. And I love the Gothic details that we put in. I was keen. It's a Gothic horror at the end of the day. I was keen to get the windows, to Gothic shaped windows into the galley, and and just little things like Bram Stoker, when he wrote the book, it's carved in the beams above the captain's cabin's bed. So there's loads of little details. And of course, it's such a dark movie, you'll never even see those details, but I know they're there. One day we'll probably do a book, a coffee table book, and we'll show all those details to the audience. But look out for stuff, because there's a lot of stuff that we put into it to make it feel real.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. I'm excited for everybody to see the movie and look for all those details.
Ah, great pleasure. Really lovely to meet you. Thank you.